All right. So this is our experiment into podcasting. I'm still liking the name Winning Arguments. Um,
Mhm.
so we'll see. Uh, just because it's kind of viral. And so what I'd like to do today, I'll just throw this out there and you two can tell me whether you agree with this or want to go another way, is I wanted to go ahead and let's take a topic and kind of step through it. I know Steve especially mentioned doing some pre-prep,
Mhm.
which we obviously don't have time to do, but we could, as we're going through this, we could talk about the pre-prep and maybe assign it to different people and then kind of choose our next topic. Does anyone have anything else they want to chat about before that?
I was leaning towards argument autopsy over the last week.
Oh, for the name?
Yeah,
Yeah.
but winning arguments is fine too. I'm just surprised to hear you moving in that direction. But it makes
Well,
sense. I mean,
yeah.
it's an easy. It's like winning arguments seems like it would attract a lot of people for direct interest.
For direct interest.
Yeah, like they would look at that and know exactly what the show is about and be like, okay, that's for me. I want to.
Winning arguments.
Yeah, I
It
want
would
to
be.
like
Yeah.
either learn how to win arguments or see what the winning arguments are, or
Yeah.
listen to an
Yeah.
argument
I mean, I don't
podcast.
know if they'll be disappointed when they get to the podcast, but I don't know. That's kind of what we're talking about. I mean, that's one
Mhm.
of the uses, right?
That's exactly right. Yeah.
So yeah, someone said it's a little too generic, so people may just think, oh, that's just kind of,
Mhm.
but I don't know. I think it's specific enough. I don't know.
I
One of the
wish
things
we
I
could
do.
combine them like cold case files or forensic files, like something like
Yeah,
that,
that's right.
because I don't know. We'll have to think about it a bit. But
Yeah. One
it'd
of the
be
things
nice to do
I've
that.
been thinking about doing is buying some Facebook or Google ads under each of the names and just seeing which one you get the most hits.
Oh, that's actually a really good idea.
Yeah, so we'll see if we have time to do that. And maybe like today's may not be good, but maybe the next time if we want to do some homework, and then we could do a full run through, and then we'll just use that. Not mention a name in the podcast, but
Mhm.
I'll upload it like 3 times, do 3 different names, and buy some ads, and just see what happens.
That's pretty smart. I like that.
So awesome. So I thought we'd go ahead and try the Joe Rogan vaccine issue from back in May. Um, and I was thinking probably the format, and I haven't quite decided how to do this, but we'd go ahead and probably either we'll display on the screen um, the content. So in this case, it's video, but other times it'll just be tweets or blog posts or Reddit. Um, I don't know whether it needs to be done in chronological order, or whether it needs to be done like we look at all the content on the back and forth on that. Like we said, we're probably going to start with a specific exchange and a specific topic, even though they may discuss other topics. We will kind of like be picking one and going deep. Um, so for the Joe Rogan thing, there was his quote on the video, and then there's um, the response from Washington Post, and then there's the response from Brett and Heather to the Washington Post. Although it was interesting because I guess I thought Joe Rogan, so Joe did respond, and that's in his response is in the Washington Post article. So actually, I don't even know what order to go through all that. So two options. One is you kind of step through a few of them and then you discuss it. Or you could, I mean, I think it'd even be interesting to say, this is what Joe Rogan said, and it's kind of controversial. What do we think about that? And then here's kind of a response. What do we think about that? Do y'all have a preference?
I mean, that sounds good to me. I mean, I can't imagine not doing the chronological first,
Yeah.
because that's the context in which people are generating arguments. A lot of times in argument, people aren't like, I'll be back to you in 4 days, and they go do a lot of research, and
Yeah.
it doesn't work like that. They kind of like snap respond. And that's pretty much how it works. And so going through it, maybe an overview of like, here's how it went down, and here are the major arguments, and then let's go back and let's look at each response and see,
Yeah.
what we think of it.
Let's try it with just talking through what Joe said and then go through the responses. just because I'd like to see how that works, and then we'll see whether it'd be better to do the overflow. And Adriel's gonna disconnect and reconnect. So I'm not sure if we should wait for him so he can see. I don't know if he's actually seen this content. Adriel, if you haven't left yet, have you seen the Joe Rogan statement?
I don't think so. I remember last time we all talked about it, so I have sort of some cursory
concept.
knowledge.
So do you want to reboot and we can give you a sec?
I just tried to do a simple reconnect. We'll see if that fixes things.
Okay. Oh, that's a different article. So Steve shared this one from Forbes. Let me show this quick video, but they're all covering the same topic.
Yeah, I think it's the same video. It's just kind of in a tweet. But
oh yeah, and that might be good to show the tweet. But let me show it from the one from the Dark Horse podcast.
Yeah, show that one
because they actually do a fairly good. So I can just play their several minutes and give the overview before they start responding. Now I haven't tried sharing the screen and including audio. Now I actually. So tell me if you guys can hear this. Is that coming through at all?
It's very, very low. It might just be your mic picking up your.
Yeah, I'm not having the actual computer sound come through. Let's see. Experimenting live on video. Sound, test speakers. Yeah, I don't even know, come to think of it. Oh, and I don't even have OBS as an audio source. I guess I should have experimented with this before.
When you share your screen, do you have the share sound checkbox option? That's usually, I've only ever
I thought there was
done
an
this
option
through work.
for that, but
I think you have to stop sharing and then reshare again in my experience.
We'll share sound. Let's see.
Like 21 years old, and you say
there
to
we go.
me,
okay, let's take it back half a step.
Yeah, I think for the most part, it's safe to get vaccinated. I do. But if you're like 21 years old and you say to me, should I get vaccinated? I go, no. Yeah. Are you healthy? Are you a healthy person? Like, look, don't do anything stupid, but you should take care of yourself. You should, if you're a healthy person and you're exercising all the time and you're young and you're eating well, and like, I don't think you need to worry about this.
Now, Rogan.
Now, one problem with that is that I wasn't able to get easily a hold, and I could have spent more time on it to get the whole context, right? Because sometimes it'll be important. I don't know whether he prefaced that and based on some of his other arguments. Yeah, I guess maybe I don't have, does anyone have anything they want to say on that, on just that snip, or I can continue playing the Dark Horse?
Sure, I can go and riff off of it.
Sure.
So I think there's a couple of ways you can look at this. Can you guys hear me? Is my okay?
You're good.
My box isn't lighting up. That's how I know I'm like being kicked out or scratching my head or something, and the noise comes through. So what's interesting about this is this shows the importance of like trying to predicate responses from other people. So it's an interesting argument because of how it's structured. It's like, do I think that vaccines work? Yes. Do I think that you should get a vaccine? Yes. But if you're a young, healthy person under 21, then I don't think you should. And why? Because you're healthy. So this is kind of a complex argument, but my mind immediately goes to looking at it as a first blush, looking at it through Toulmin and Toulmin's model of argumentation, which is the data, claim, and warrant. And I could like put this up on the screen and talk a little bit about Stephen Toulmin's idea. Anybody who's taken a composition class or a public speaking class has seen the Toulmin model if you've taken one in the last 20 years. If there's like a whiteboard, I can draw it too. because it's super duper simple. I don't know how Zoom works. I'm like the only professor in the United States who doesn't have a proper Zoom account because my university didn't buy one for anybody. So we have WebEx.
Yeah. And you might,
which is it's like the zoom.com you get off of Wish, like that joke.
So I imagine you could prep some of these, but you might also just have a slide deck of things that you think you'll discuss in case it comes up in the middle.
That's a really good idea.
That anytime you want, pull up Toolman, right? Because definitely when you use terms like that, I'm going to call, anytime you use a name or a theory, I'm going to call you out on that and try and get you.
Perfect. Yeah. I can also explain it in ways that, like, I'm in the middle of making a series of videos for another website. They've asked me to do it. And so I'm trying to be very simple with those two. So it's good practice for me to not launch into this stuff. But the most important concept from Stephen Toolman's theory of argument here is the qualifier, which is an overlooked concept, which would be this question of when you're making your claim, like, should you get vaccinated? No. And then it would be like, maybe not, like softening that or saying maybe if, but then there's also this other thing called rebuttal, which is usually indicated by the term unless. So Rogan is also offering rebuttal as a constructive part of argument. We don't think of argument like that. Usually we think of rebuttal as going after somebody, but it's actually a very creative way and very clever way to make your claim more believable because you're including its defeasibility in it. And ironically, argument works extremely well. And some theorists would say argument doesn't exist unless you have the conditions for its own defeat within it. So it's actually kind of a nice argument Rogan's making because he's saying you should get vaccinated unless you're a healthy 21-year-old who goes to the gym every day.
It's interesting that you call that. And this may be getting too deep into argument theory and how we're doing it in Canonical Debate Lab and stuff, but that you're phrasing as a rebuttal. And what we're finding is that we want to isolate claims and get them exact. So for us, we kind of consider that context. So are you discussing everyone or are you discussing people under 21? And those will have two different answers.
Hi guys, I'm stepping in now. It's Tim.
Hey, Tim.
Welcome.
You're not supposed to show up on vacation.
I know. I'm in here really quickly. One concept we're working with in the Canonical Debate Lab is the concept of general to specific debates. Where you start with something, you can debate something really general, not abstract. We say differently abstract from general. The example we usually work with is like immigration is bad, right? And then you can, well, okay, illegal immigration is bad. And then you can get more specific. Illegal immigration is bad for residents of the place, and in this case, one angle at looking at this is you should get the COVID vaccination is a more general case. And he's pulling it down further into a more specific case of if you're 21 and healthy, you should not get the COVID vaccine. So there's different categories of who are you as linked together with this argument of you should get the COVID vaccine.
Yeah.
I don't know how that works into your theories, but that's one way we see breaking it down.
It's perfect. I mean, it's totally fine. I don't see anything in that. The terminology is really there as a filing cabinet. So.
Yeah, and it'll be interesting to kind of sort through that because it's interesting when you said that had that as kind of rebuttal or the defeasibility. So that was an interesting way of thinking about it. So that'll help us.
Yeah, I think defeasibility is also kind of what Tim is talking about because people immediately realize they're in trouble when they make an argument like immigration is horrible. Well, I mean, you know what I mean by immigration. I mean, the bad people, right? That's kind of where they immediately go to that. They dance over to that square, like within probably even before they finish the sentence, right? So before they finish their claim anyway. So, but I think you can think of it as context. I'm very comfortable saying arguments don't exist without context. You just have these kind of floating utterances, maybe. It's a very important part for how I study argument is the context.
Yeah, or if an argument had all the context, it would be very long, right? Which is the context.
Right, but that's a beautiful part about mapping and stuff. You get these crazy trees. It looks really nice to me.
Yeah. So let's dive a little deeper in this. So that's what Joe said, and then Joe Rogan got a lot of pushback, and we're watching the Dark Horse podcast where they then give some feedback to what Joe said in that episode. And actually, do I have a separate link for that one? I think and I'll get better at this. I'll probably want to edit these together.
Data. The WAPO, the Washington Post, joined the fray with this piece. You can show my screen just for me to read the headline, Zach. Joe Rogan is using his wildly popular podcast to question vaccines. Experts are fighting back. So that's one of the.
I don't know if we want to talk about every little bit, but maybe it'd be interesting to talk about that title.
I mean, headlines are always just a mess, just a nightmare.
Yeah.
Outlets.
Yeah, and to be clear, and I guess one thing I should have said, I kind of wanted to caveat about Joe thing is that he was speaking off the cuff. It was in the middle of a larger conversation. So we're not expecting Joe to speak. We're not coming down on him for speaking perfectly, but we are using this as an example to explore different ways of communicating clearly and accurately and communicating together. So we're not.
One thing to focus on that little clip right there isn't just that the headline is a nightmare. Wait, are you playing?
I'm trying to find. I'm trying to get the.
Okay.
I'm sorry. I'm trying to seek something. I should stop sharing when I'm doing this. But no, you go ahead.
Well, yeah. Is the headline's a nightmare, but also the way she read it is
I didn't
kind
even
of
think of
fascinating.
that.
Of course.
The way she read the word experts, you can already detect a sense of irony in there.
I
Right.
didn't even think about that.
Oh yeah. All this stuff is fair game.
So to critique the headline, now the headline's goal, and we're also going to talk about audience and what your goals are, right? So the goal of the headline is to convince people to read it. The headline, it doesn't have a goal to be accurate or useful. It maybe should, because a lot of people just read the headline, and we need to talk about the dangers of sensational headlines leaving people with the wrong impression. I mean, I can tell you, I mostly just read the titles on Twitter as they're going by. So, I can definitely get the wrong thing. But, using his wildly popular podcast kind of implies that Joe was intentional, like this was a topic of his podcast, like that would be in the title of his podcast. But no, this sounds like an aside while he was talking to a comedian. So that's kind of disingenuous even. The experts are fighting back. It's probably accurate. And it is a wildly popular podcast. So that's the only thing I really see disingenuous about that title. Does anyone else have anything to want to say about that?
I mean, I think that kind of stepping back and kind of getting the bird's eye view of the podcast, maybe we want to have a regular segment where we kind of go through and everyone picks their worst groaners in terms of headlines that are, as a segment, maybe.
Yeah.
Because I feel like we can get lost in the sauce here pretty fast. If our goal, so it depends on what our goal is our goal to have us as a panel look at the Rogan situation and what does that situation count for us? Do we want to go look at other commentators as well? Like how many layers do we want? And I think that's an open question worth discussing. And then the second thing would be if we're just giving our take on it, like that argument, then we could do a second show where we're like, let's look at how other people represented this argument. And then we could talk about that. So it becomes this multi-coursed layer.
Represented this the overall argument or this exchange of the argument? It
could be either one. It's like, how does this argument get represented? And then is that an argument? Yeah. And so you can fall into this, gravity well pretty quickly.
Yeah.
But, so also it makes me I'm sorry, I'm monopolizing, but one other thing I want to say is media literacy would really be a really cool thing to kind of tack onto the podcast. This what made me think of this. If we want to do looking at good sources, because everybody's interested in that. Everyone's like, I want to find the best facts. Okay. Yeah. Well, you need some kind of media literacy or some kind of rubric to determine that. And there's a lot of things we could talk about in those terms, I think.
Yeah, I think media literacy is a great thing to include in our discussions.
Yeah, I mean, now we're more into my alley. The argument part, that's not. That's I'm not as up to snuff as you are, but the media literacy part is, I think, a very interesting part and super related, because that's the lens through what all this is going to be.
And so when we talk about the pre-work for the show, Adriel, maybe you kind of take that on. I mean, you'll do it naturally because that's what you're interested in, but maybe to find some other sources that covered it better, or some other, or the groaners. I like the idea of, I do like having short segments like groaners and stuff like that, but that would depend on how long it takes. And then I think, going through kind of a public exchange like this, and if we have time in the episode, and the additional content that we could find is how the other meta, which actually this one, of course, we're going like 5 layers deep just to begin with, because then we're going to see what the dark horse said, and then we're going to see what Joe's response was. And then we could go to the SIO, Serious Inquiries Only podcast, which critiqued the dark horse comment on Joe Rogan's comment. So we are actually doing that in this episode. But yeah, I think we should encourage that as long as we have time. And like Steve said, it could be a black hole.
Or we could name the podcast Argument Tiramisu.
Yeah. And if anyone has anything else, let me know. But I think we can get into
it's almost like a
response.
An argument hash, right? You hash out arguments,
like
right?
That.
And hash is a kind of food.
I like that. I'm super into food metaphors. I don't know why. I mean, I guess because food is awesome. I don't know. I'm always using them.
Of course, we were doing kind of a sports metaphors before, so I don't know if there's a
mixed metaphors.
What is it when you watch a video of your play with your coach? Is there a term for that? There isn't, is there? It's just a replay.
They call it watching tape in college football. I know that. Like, we watch some tape, even though that's like obviously an anachronistic metaphor now. It's all digital, but they're like, we watch some game film, or we watch some tape.
Okay, I'm making notes. All right, so let's see what comes out.
Their podcast to question vaccines. Experts are fighting back. So that's one of the main news outlets in the United States here, and I'm just going to read from my screen, Zach, so you don't have to show it again. 2 paragraphs near the end of this WAPO article, dated April 29th. So this is 2 days ago. Misinformation coming from someone like Rogan continues to perpetuate doubt, said Kalina Koltai, a vaccine misinformation researcher at the University of Washington. A lot of young adults follow him, and he's encouraging people to have hesitation. Koltai pointed out that, quote, no one is getting all of their information from Joe Rogan, but when his comments clash with what experts tell us, it helps muddy the waters. Quote, hearing these conflicting messages from someone you might trust and someone you might agree with typically, it can potentially cause you to be concerned, she said. Quote, oftentimes it just ends up confusing people and making them not sure what to do. So that language struck me as so anti-scientific and just antithetical to skepticism that, although I don't tend to do this, certainly not on air, I went and figured out who.
So before she dives more into that, and I don't, and normally what I'd say is that if I'm editing the pre-work for this, is that I would have pulled up the post and not had Heather reading someone else's words, because that can be confusing. So just to be fair to her and the Dark Horse podcast, but we don't have time. So I thought I guess so in this case we could talk about the article's response if anyone finds that interesting, or Heather's statement of it being I can't actually remember her exact wording, but what she said.
I mean, she called it anti-scientific, and I don't understand what in there was anti-scientific. It seemed to be taking a very specific position on, she called it anti-skeptical and anti-scientific. Mm-hmm. It's basically somebody saying, a famous person normalizes certain opinions when they say it. That didn't sound anti-scientific, anti-skeptical. It sounds more like common practice. So I don't know. I didn't get from her statements what she found to be non-scientific about it, unless she means we didn't study Joe Rogan's comments and their impact on society, and therefore I'm making up an opinion.
Yeah, and I don't know, you'd listened this earlier. In the rest of her comments, you didn't really get a kind of good feel from her on why she thought it was anti-scientific or anti-skeptical.
Yeah, I know that in the next segment, all she does is attack the person who said it. She tries to undermine the authority of the person making the statement, but she doesn't really attack the source of, or she doesn't attack the position itself, basically.
Yes. So I think, and people can interrupt me if they have a point too, is that she's saying that the skeptical and, in her mind, scientific way is for public discourse, to have people to be able to voice concerns and discuss those publicly. And then thus, if someone is shot down for voicing something differently from government or authoritative sources, then that is anti-skepticism, I'd say, rather than anti-science, because science.
So you think she's really attacking the substance rather than, in other words, whether or not that person should get the vaccine, as opposed to whether or not a famous person making statements influences public opinion. Like, I'm not sure which. I understood her as attacking the public opinion.
Well,
Statement.
but the thing is that when she goes through this, and we can play it if people are curious, but she seems to be saying that this public person is not a scientist. And I think something you said another at a different time, Tim, was, well, the person didn't say they were a scientist. They said they were a social researcher. And so what the person was saying, so I don't think that Heather did a great job of outlining her main claim, which most people don't. But yeah, I think her claim is that people need to be able to discuss this thing publicly without being canceled or called out, and that this person isn't a scientist. So this, which is really weird, because she's calling out someone who didn't say that they were a scientist about not being a scientist. So this person can't speak on the scientific method, but this person wasn't talking about the scientific method. This person was saying, but the person wasn't just saying a public person speaks out about it and people tend to listen, because I don't think Heather's disagreeing with that, but the researcher's main assumption is that the authority is correct in this situation, which seems to be Heather's challenge. Although I don't think that that's a wrong thing. This person is researching misinformation, and that person defines misinformation as disagreeing with the accepted authorities. Yeah, so that's kind of how I'd characterize the motives and objectives of the different people involved.
I did kind of get the vibe that her sort of anti-scientific comment partially was I think why Joe Rogan was being discounted, like thinly veiled, was that he's not a scientist. And so to say, like, the response is, well, you aren't a scientist either. I think that may be a part of her calling it out. But I think it's also, I sort of got the idea that it's like, so we're unhappy with Joe Rogan, not because he shared his opinion, but because it's, an opinion that we don't agree with, and he's not an expert chiming in. And instead of sort of saying, hey, we want to dig deeper and figure out, why are you saying this? Why, why are you saying that it is safe, it is effective for most people? And then what's your actual data behind saying that, if you're 21 and go to the gym, et cetera, now you shouldn't get it? Like, why are you saying that, as opposed to shut up and stop talking, digging deeper? To me, that's where it gets anti-scientific, is just saying, stop talking. That thing that you're talking about, we aren't allowed to talk about, as opposed to why. Let's actually dig deeper and explore. Maybe we're wrong. We don't think that we are, but let's talk about the specifics as to why you're saying what you're saying, and why the WAPO journalists, and why Heather, and actually looking at all the underlying evidence that's, at least so far, not actually being discussed. It's just a bunch of, how dare you talk about this.
And I think later on in the podcast, they do start digging into discussing the actual, whether that's a right decision or a right thing to say. Yeah, but the Washington Post article, I think, didn't even. Well, okay, they did get into it a little bit because they were quoting Fauci saying that that you need to take it, and maybe this may be too soon, but yeah, I'm still sharing. So some other Dr. Fauci is saying that vaccinations aren't just about making the individual receiving them don't get COVID-19, and that young, healthy people should. Oh wait, he's basically saying they aren't just about making sure the individual receiving them doesn't get COVID-19, which is really kind of all. Yeah, I can't think of a good way to say that. And then it's interesting that Joe's eventual response was, I encouraged many people to take them. I just said if you're your own healthy person, you don't need it. And then he responds, their argument was you need it for other people, but that's a different conversation. And yes, that makes sense. Now, what I think is disingenuous about that's a different conversation is that when he was talking, and that's the problem with not having the full context, he didn't say only thinking about yourself and not thinking about other people, the decision would be to do that. He just said, would I tell someone who's young and 21 to take it or not? And I would say no. So I think him saying, but that's a different conversation is completely disingenuous in my case.
Yeah, this
Right.
is somebody. Yeah, this is somebody trying to say without losing face. Oh, I didn't think about that. You're right. And in argument, you never say that. Maybe we should say that, but people never say this. But this is when I read this, the way I'd reconstruct it, just be like, oh, that argument, that's a good argument. I agree with that. But also, this undermines his entire point, right? He didn't think about how vaccines work, which I mean, it is kind of a hard. I mean, Fauci has a very hard argument to win, trying to persuade a whole culture of people whose primary value is self-improvement and individual success to do something for other people. It's a very hard thing to do. And in public health messaging, they deal with this all the time in public health comm. But I see this as Rogan saying, oh yeah, you're right. I was wrong. But he's never going to say it like that,
Yeah, I think the way that they approached it was also pretty unhelpful because for Joe Rogan to have prefaced that with, I think they're safe, I think that they do work. Given his audience, that seems like a really powerful starting point. If they focused on, hey, Joe Rogan agrees with 95% of what experts are saying, let's talk to him about that last 5%. I think you don't get into the same thing where he sort of has to double down and quasi backpedal, but not really to save face. I think that's an outcome of attacking him for that point, as opposed to the fact that he's got that audience that probably doesn't necessarily agree with the first two statements. If you actually quoted that and dug deep, that's more powerful, in my opinion, to start from a point of that's actually a really cool thing, like that he agrees with these points. Let's just have a meaningful conversation about that one point that we disagree with. And that instead of, the knee-jerk reaction on, no, you have to agree with 100% of it or shut the hell up.
I think it was interesting that both the news station included that and the Dark Horse podcast included that, and the Washington Post, I think, article did at least include that. So they didn't seem to, although I don't see the quote in here, so I'm not sure if they did or didn't. But it is nice at least they didn't just start them off at the, if you're a 21-year-old, you shouldn't take it and kill your grandmother. I think it's good that they did that. But yeah, I think it would have been better for we're going to use this term, and maybe have to use a better term, but the epistemic commons, for people communicating well and stuff, as a group, and how we communicate to say, yeah, we appreciate that he agrees with the the scientific consensus that is right now that it's good for most people to take it. Now let's talk about his concern about this specific segment. And then, yeah, I would have rather see Joe Rogan just come out and say, I just wish he could have left out, but that's a different conversation because he's kind of revising history there.
I mean,
on what he said.
You've only got one decision to make. It's not like, okay, I'm going to not get vaccinated for my health.
Right.
And then also tomorrow I'll go get vaccinated for other people.
Yeah.
They're not separate decisions.
He was saving face, and I know how hard it is to admit.
What's interesting is that the dark horse also treats it as this sort of two separate conversations thing. If we go down if we get further down, you'll see they talk about the decisions on a personal level versus the decisions on a societal level, and compare it to people on the left versus people on the right, and how they organize their decisions. But in the end, it's all one decision. Either you do or you don't, right?
Yeah, you have to take into account all the factors and then make your decision on whether you're going to get it, and how much you're going to badger your friend who did or didn't get it.
I mean, one thing we didn't completely illustrate here, and I think is the underlying tension of this whole debate, isn't about the vaccines itself. It's about, essentially what the dark horse is arguing, that these conversations need to be held out in the open, and people should be able to state their opinions for the public discussion, versus the impact of a public figure making a blanket statement with only having part knowledge. In other words, the responsibility that Joe Rogan has in terms of stating opinions. Everybody knows he's kind of playing it off the cuff, but is that an acceptable way to deal with decisions that affect society broadly? And I didn't hear that. Like I heard that in essentially the argument of the non-scientist or whatever she is, but nobody really makes that argument throughout the rest of the things that I've seen here.
Now, it's a good position to take. I mean, the epistemic comments. What a great phrase! Wow, is this a CDL thing? Is this?
I think that's part of I think that's part of Open Global Mind.
Oh wow,
that's another group that we need to get you involved in.
Okay. Oh,
look that up, and we probably should have all these as our unpaying sponsors.
Well,
it's like the Illuminatus trilogy.
Yeah, right.
It's like playing Illuminati, but with epistemic groups.
I think we need NASCAR style uniforms with all the patches of our sponsor. That would be a good thing to maybe put in the notes. Let me piggyback on what Tim is saying here, because this word epistemic is kind of loaded. The episteme, this ancient Greek word, right, which means knowledge, right? And then you have this other ancient Greek word that means knowledge, doxa. They both translate to knowledge, but the difference in the ancient Greek mind was episteme was something a little bit, higher or firmer. It was like the knowledge that's the way we think of, epistemic. And then doxa is like public opinion. And both are valid forms of knowledge, but for different contexts, right? So I think, the thing about like, what's wrong with having a public conversation about this stuff? I think a lot of people kind of are like nervous about that, but they're not sure how to articulate that expertise is not credibility, right? So people like Fauci have to work 10 times as hard as somebody like Joe Rogan to get people to repeat their content. And that's an interesting thing to think about, is like, so ethos, where we get the word ethics, but also this idea of credibility, is also translated in ancient Greek to home, not house, but home, right? Somebody who's like goodwill, you could translate it that way too. So somebody you feel like is a part of the commons, right? And so this ethos is something that's out of control. And I feel like the misinformation researcher is trying to say these people muddy the waters because they inject this. They don't have the rhetorical terminology, but I would say they inject this like incredible amount of energy into the system through their own ethos that is not as easy to deal with as somebody saying, well, I have a MD PhD from Hopkins or something. So I mean, that's what I would add to that. I think, it's good, and Habermas deals with this too in his public sphere stuff about, it's nice to think of people going in and having these open debates in society, but it's always loaded. There's always a thumb on the scale. People have more money or influence, or they have more of a conception of being from there or being a good guy, a good person. And then they like harm the argument, but I don't know if they really harm it. That's another whole thing to go into. But.
So awesome. I do want to wrap this up in a couple minutes, and then we can have the meta conversation about how this went and what we want to do next time. Does anyone have any other points they want to go ahead and make on the Joe Rogan topic?
I have one really quick one. I'm sorry. I feel like I'm talking so much today.
Yeah,
but I think there's this really interesting larger meta argument circulating in society about science as evidence. And listening to you guys talk about the Washington Post thing, it seems like there's an argument that's being made, or maybe it's just a claim, or maybe it's starting to approach the level of fact, which is that when people claim someone's anti-science, what they're trying to say is you're questioning science without doing the hard work of coming up with a viable process that would be the equivalent of the scientific process. Like, that's a big mouthful, but I feel like that's kind of shortened into this. Like, if you just say, well, I'm not going to get the vaccine, or I think the vaccine's unhealthy. It's like, well, who are you to say that? Science has determined that it's right. So there's this kind of hidden claim in there that, like, you haven't shown that your process of arriving at that conclusion is close to or at the same level as the trusted medical research or science issue. So that would be something I would add as something interesting to think about, is when these moments pop up in our society today.
Yeah, I think it was sort of touched on earlier with the idea of sort of, is misinformation just when you disagree with what's currently agreed, which seems, because I tend to sort of intentionally consume information from both sides, and people sort of say, who are you to argue with science? But everything I see the other side posting, they're still quoting scientists. It's just the 1% or 5% or whatever small percent it is. And what's not really talked about is, what does that smaller group need to say to sort of maybe start to overrule the majority? Or are we just saying that you can never overrule the majority, which is another thing itself? Like, what are the criteria for when the minority can actually be considered correct? Like, possibly what's the threshold? What does the majority have to prove? There's that underlying conversation that is sort of that higher level conversation, because it's not just about this topic. It's about, everything from is the earth round to, is climate change real? It's the same conversation through all of it. And we're just talking about each topic at a time, as opposed to, when can the minority actually have an argument against the majority?
Yeah, which I think was part of Heather's kind of, Heather Weinstein's thrust, even though I don't think she said it anywhere, was we need to be able to have these discussions rather than just dismissing people that disagree. Go ahead, Tim.
Yeah, I was just gonna say about that. Yeah, that's a very good point. That I don't think anybody is really disagreeing with the scientific method. There's no debate about the scientific method. There's debate about who is actually following the scientific method, and essentially which organizations or groups we're going to believe are following, because you have to believe, right? You're not doing the science yourself, you're following scientific opinion. And so if you believe that the scientific consensus is actually based on mostly groupthink or wishful thinking, which can creep into, and you always go back to the Galileo, was the Galileo Gambit, I've heard it called, which is everybody thought Galileo was wrong. Then if you are the kind of person that already disagrees or distrusts organizations and government and entities of power, you're very likely to believe that the quote unquote scientific community is one of those organizations that's not living up to its own standards. And that's that's a valid point to take, right? It's a valid position. But if it just comes down to belief and leave it there, and your go-to is to disbelieve what's said as opposed to your go-to is to believe, it's the same thing. It's you're not doing the work yourself to figure it out, or you're doing the work yourself only based on your own confirmation bias, right?
Yeah, I think that's a deep conversation that we'll probably have. I guess almost every topic we bring up, that's going to be somewhere in there. Who's an expert? And why do we trust them, or should we trust them? So for our next meeting, do we want to, let me throw some things out. So one is we pick another topic similar to this one, and then I can take the responsibility of prepping the materials to be able to share on the screen like I did today, and hopefully better prepped. And then we could, if anyone finds anything else that if you're gonna find something that you want to talk about that's an extension from the main thing, then I'd suggest that you have that prepped on your computer. But also you can send it to me so I have it as backup in case we have problems sharing. Yeah, does anyone else have any thoughts on feedback on how that experiment went, and was it useful?
I think it was useful.
I liked it.
I'd sort of like to see us keep going on the same topic to sort of see if we get further down, if more things come out of it. And then eventually maybe go to a topic that we'd actually be allowed to talk about on YouTube, just so that we have a chance of being posted and not getting whoever posts it banned.
Yeah, I would feel comfortable attempting this one and seeing if I get banned.
You'll get demonetized. It's probably the worst thing that'll happen to you.
Yeah, I mean, a friend of ours did get banned, but she was saying some things that.
Yeah, well,
I think we're far enough out, and it's a meta conversation about it, that the robots may ban us, but I think on an appeal, if I get a warning, then we pull back.
Yeah,
and then we have
sense
to think out, do we need to store the content somewhere outside of YouTube?
Mm-hmm.
Fair enough. And that might be an interesting data point to see how close we can get to the topic, and sort of, can you play seemingly anti-vax content and discuss it and still have that be allowed? Like if we're not explicitly agreeing or disagreeing with it, but sort of having a meta conversation, that would be interesting.
Which I definitely know that we're gonna get, the AI is gonna
absolutely
do stuff. But the question is, will YouTube have the resources to make an exception? But
I know I've been hearing that they don't really actually seem to read the appeals. It's just if you're in that bucket of things that got flagged and you're not a name that they recognize, nope.
Yeah, they probably don't have time. So we may have to.
But yeah, I mean, I'm fine with, especially if this is more like the meta, the planning part of the conversation, where it's us trying to go through the reaction, then the reaction to the reaction, and the reaction to the reaction to the reaction, and seeing how far we can go down, and all the pieces that end up being uncovered by our dissection of it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think it'd be cool to keep going with this topic.
Just as feedback, I felt it was a little bit all over the place, a little bit scattered. We didn't know which way we were going. And I think also the first few episodes will probably be like that anyway, because they're, concepts that we're going to introduce, like the CDL, general to specific, and things like that we'll start saying more often later on, and it'll be quicker. But I think in terms of prep work, it would be good to have like an argument map already laid out that shows the territory of this debate and where and what we want to cover. So it'll be, maybe, I don't know if it's at the beginning or we just have it as our roadmap to make sure we get to all these different arguments and move on, so we pace it well.
It's an interesting idea. I'll have to think about that. Make a note.
I guess
I can do the mapping part, but we just have to figure out how it can help us. We'll try it next time, basically.
Yeah, I agree. I agree with the mapping idea, but maybe just like a rough outline of the structure of it might be. You don't want to do too much, because then you're like overworking on a part of the show. But a kind of a rough outline to visually show people, if this is going to be a visual thing. I assume it is. I don't know, but
I think we want to leave it to where people could get value from it in audio, but it'd be a little bit richer with video.
And
Ben,
that,
did
I
you
think,
find?
I mean, what we
Jason?
could do is if we're doing if we're doing the map, if we're going over the map, it would essentially, we would have to have kind of media queued for each one. It's like, and then Heather said this, this, and then this from Washington Post, or and then this, you know, so that would help the audio portion.
And so any other we talked about having groaners, or
I think Grown is a very good idea. It
So-
gives just a quick overview of media coverage.
and should that be
You have to have
just
a cleverer title. Groaners is my first one. I thought of a better one. Headache lines.
for headlines, headache lines?
Kind of cheesy, but you know,
Yeah.
it was something to riff off of anyway.
Yeah, so do we want to assign these out to people to figure out, and do those need to be on topic, or is it going to be like, here's a segment, like maybe at the beginning where we say, you know, here's what are the headache lines for this week, go, you know, Steve and Adriel, is that what we're thinking?
Yeah, I mean, if we find one that we're into, the thing that I would be most interested in doing, if we're like talking about doing this one again, would be making the deck and doing the quick Toolman model thing, just as a way to understand what Rogan's trying to do, and then give people that tool of kind of like, well, you can look at arguments through the Toolman model is obviously not perfect, and it's been heavily criticized. That can come later too, but it's a nice starting point to thinking about how to visualize what he's trying to do with his words in the moment, and try to understand what kind of unspoken assumptions are there too. So we can talk about, I can do that thing about the qualifier and the rebuttal.
it sounds a bit like we want to spend a session, you know, doing what we did today, figure out what sort of skeleton for the structure we can start to build, and then go over the same topic again next time and start to use this as the roadmap for, let's start to fill in the blanks, and then have the same conversation at the end of the next session saying, now what's become apparent that we need to add to the skeleton, and sort of keep building that almost like a presentation or like a form that we're trying to fill out for each one. And I imagine we'll end up, you know, on this for at least a couple of videos as we say, hey, here's the different segments that we think that we should cover in order to effectively dissect this discussion. And then hopefully at the end of, you know, 2, 3, 4 sessions of this, we've got that roadmap that then we can attempt, okay, now let's pick a new topic and see if we can use this presentation end to end to have that discussion about the discussion. If that makes sense.
No, it does make sense.
I applaud the effort of going that deep. I don't know if anyone would watch something that long.
Sorry, my point is that first series of sessions isn't for the public. Like if you publish it just to sort of say, hey, it's the built in public, but that's to build the framework where eventually you have the one presentation that the goal is to make that be interesting and exciting, and that you use that as the framework for sort of the future discussions, and that's meant to be consumable.
Is it? Yeah, he's just saying each iteration we're going to get a little smoother about it, more organized and better,
right.
And at some point it's going to actually be consumable by
right. Yeah, so
Well,
like if we go through the bits, one second, I'm trying to do this, like what counts as information and misinformation, that sounds sort of like a precursor to the series, or like a conversation about the other parts. I guess I'm talking about, as we're talking about like the groaners, for example, if we're saying, if we're going to have if the next topic is about, I can't even think of something about, you know, if the earth is flat or not, there's going to be a series of questions that we're trying to answer through that section of the conversation, and just what are those questions, and then making a presentation where maybe it's, okay, Steve goes through the model that he talked about and how does that apply here, and then if I look at the, you know, how is the media approaching this, and any sort of a spot that we either as a group want to tackle, or given our different backgrounds, one or two people might be especially, I don't know if skilled is the right word, but sort of that's their niche, the thing that they're most interested in, and having them guide or at least, heavily influence that conversation. But I agree that this initial part of us trying to figure out what actually goes into that skeleton that we're talking about in every episode probably isn't going to be terribly exciting.
Well, one of the goals was this to be a light lift for us to expose our ideas, and the prep work's already getting too big. And if it's several meetings per topic, and then you have editing or redoing a run through, I don't know that we're shooting for something that polished and that entertaining.
I think I maybe I kind of like what Adriel's saying. So maybe think of it like this, like it, maybe not the heaviest lift, but as we go, there's going to be segments we like that we're going to want to do every time. And there's, 4 or 5 of us working on the show. We could just have everyone say, I'll take that segment, and then I'll prepare a 5 or 6 minute riff, and then everyone can talk about it for whatever amount of time we put on the show. And then it becomes distributed in a nice way.
Mhm.
Once we get those segments, but I don't know if we really have a sense of what our 5 regular segments are going to be yet.
And I guess if we had a choice with time and energy of doing segments or just hitting an interaction between 2 people, even a statement, a comeback, and a comeback or something like that, I'd almost want to just focus on that. And then, the segments will come up naturally. I don't think we need to make a variety show.
Right. Yeah. I would
But
say, like, you pick the object of the exchange.
Yeah.
And then from that, we would have these approaches that we always look at. And then that could
Yeah.
be generative of going into things that are unique for the episode.
Yeah.
But we would always have those 4 or 5 perspectives. It's kind
And
of
so, yeah, I mean, what I think would say is that for like Tim was saying, for the first 5-10 episodes, it's only going to be people in our kind of debate and the debate systems and these kind of world changers, people that we know personally that would take the time to watch it. And then if we do get enough people showing an interest in the very, very rough and very ugly version, then we could dedicate more time and clean it up. And as we go through, we'll just naturally get better. I guess I'm not convinced that we should probably hit the same exact exchange for more than 1 hour session, because I think we have to time box it. We could talk unlimited about just one statement. We could probably talk for like 4 or 5 hours on it.
And to be clear, when I'm saying we revisit this, I'm talking about just what I would call like the episode zeros, where we're just trying to plan it out. And if the goal is to keep it light and not have that much overhead, I understand. Part of it is finding new topics. I imagine until we really get it figured out what exactly we're talking about and what are the ideal topics look like for us. This at least seemed to be like a fairly juicy area. And I still think that there's a decent chance that it gets banned just because of the AI taking a look at it, which makes me think that this is the one to have the meta conversation that might not be that interesting because we might not be able to post it anyway. And so it's using that, and I would say like 3 sessions max. We aren't trying to get a perfectly polished thing, but if we make some sort of a skeleton out of this, and then next week have the conversation around that skeleton and start to fill in the blanks just to see if it works. And then if it does, maybe the following week, we use that same skeleton for a new topic. And it's just sort of trying to use this as the test for all the presentations that seem to present themselves in this session that were worth talking about. Could we use those for a new topic and still have it cover the majority of the points? And as we're filling in the blanks on this presentation skeleton, it seems meaningful and it seems like people might be interested in it.
Okay, so we're over time, but quickly. So do we want to choose our next exchange? Or do we want to hit this exact? I mean, we're gonna have it. So what I want to do for next meeting is I want us to take another try at either a different topic or redo this topic. And when I say topic, I mean the Joe Rogan comment. And then we could decide, is that episode 1 or do we want to do it again before we get to episode 1? So I guess, over the next couple of days, if people would suggest one topic, the best they think to use as for next Monday, and I will do the research and try and gather things up, and then I suggest everyone else to gather up their content and be ready to screen share. And Steve would, so Adriel, if you have anything about media, and Steve has anything about the different models and stuff that are out there, and Tim and I, would see if we have time to do Tim, if you want to put it in a map, I might go ahead and do an outline, especially with the media links that I have in the order I think we should go into them, and then we'll try it again and see what happens. But I am releasing this video on my YouTube channel, so no one watches it. So
I'll put it on
my
my
mom to create a new, like, I would suggest you create a new channel.
I am not doing that until we have some viewers.
No,
I'm not allowed
but that's
to,
the point, is
actually.
because the moment that you get banned or whatever just because we're experimenting with some stuff.
Oh, they can ban my channel. That's fine.
Yeah, but then you,
I do actually have a YouTube channel for Argument Autopsy, so maybe I should put it there
yeah, maybe.
because I created one. The logo sucks.
Yeah.
Also,
and-
I'll
and then
volunteer
you-
my Vimeo channel. I have a Vimeo channel.
I was in a call. I didn't.
Yeah, let me know if you need, Steve. You should be able to download the video from YouTube, but if you want the original copy, just
That's a safe place. They won't ban a paying customer, probably. I mean, we can push that line too if we want, Adriel.
Yeah.
Yep, I think that's a lot more chance at being successful. And I doubt they have the same AI crawling for, content violations that YouTube has. So yeah, I think that ends up being safer. But yeah,
Alright.
I'm on the about that. I would suggest not posting this in a channel that you're terribly attached to. Just because, you don't really have much of a recourse if they decide to shut down your channel, which I haven't heard of after one violation, but still.
Yeah.
If that's the one that you're rolling the dice on, maybe you don't want that on the Reason Score or Gullybot or whatever channel it might be posted under.
So if everyone by Wednesday, end of your day, post one or more topics, and then we'll debate it on Thursday, or I'll just pick one because I need to have time to do a little bit of research, and then we'll get together on Monday.
Okay, I won't have time to do prep this week because I'm on vacation and may not be here. next
Don't
week.
worry about it. You shouldn't even showed up now.
I shouldn't have shown up. I was making coffee.
All right. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
And
Thanks all.
let's chat in the Slack.
Yep.